Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a mental model that is absolutely as urgent right now as it was exactly 500 years ago. We're looking at Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, specifically Chapter 13. Now, you hear the name Machiavelli and you probably picture, Renaissance political scheming. But what we're actually diving into today is a universal mathematical law of survival. It's a structural doctrine all about capability, power, and the ultimate price of taking the easy way out when things hit the fan.
Let's start with a really counterintuitive paradox. Ask yourself, why is a highly competent ally actually your greatest strategic threat? We're always taught to seek out the strongest possible help when we're in trouble, right? But as we're going to uncover in this explainer, relying on a strong external force is pretty much the ultimate trap for your own sovereignty. It looks like a lifeline, but man, it's really a leash. Let's look at exactly how this mechanism works. Section 1. The threat of competent allies. Okay, let's dive right into this. To really grasp Machiavelli's doctrine, we first need to define the players on the board and understand the core mechanics of how power shifts during a crisis. In Machiavelli's terms, an auxiliary force is basically another ruler's army that temporarily steps in to assist you when you're in deep trouble. But, and this is a massive but, they aren't doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. No way. They're seeking to maximize their own geopolitical leverage, just using assistance as a pretext. So why do rulers even invite them in? Well, leaders are usually looking for a quick, short-term military advantage. They want to avoid the heavy, painful cost of building up their own internal capabilities, so they just outsource their survival.
Now, there's an absolutely crucial distinction Machiavelli makes between mercenaries and auxiliaries. People mix these up all the time, but they present entirely different threats. Mercenaries are just a rented force. They're dangerous because they're weak, they lack motivation, and they might just flat out fail you when you need them most. But auxiliaries are a foreign ally, and they are infinitely more dangerous because they might actually succeed. That is the hidden structural rule we're exploring today. While mercenaries fail you, successful auxiliaries emerge from the crisis with all the military leverage and bargaining dominance over the very ruler they just saved. By succeeding, they essentially absorb your sovereignty.
Section 2. The psychology of dependency.
Okay, let's shift our focus just a bit. It's one thing to understand the military tactics, but it's a whole other ballgame to understand the human mind when it's put under immense pressure. Let's look at the psychology of dependency and why we consistently fall into this exact same trap.
There's a deep psychological underlayer to this dependency trap, and it's driven by three main biases. First, we have the emergency outsourcing bias. When leaders are under severe pressure, they just want immediate rescue, even if it costs them their long-term autonomy. Second is the competent submission effect. This is just a clinical reality. Humans naturally defer to actors who demonstrate superior capability. We instinctively yield to the strongest person in the room. And finally, there's the post-crisis dependency lock. Once your survival gets tied to an external protector, it becomes psychologically and structurally incredibly difficult to reclaim your independence once the dust settles.
So the absolutely crucial point here is captured perfectly in this quote. Rescue creates invisible hierarchy. The saved becomes subordinate to the savior. The very act of being saved instantly rewires the entire power dynamic. You might still wear the crown or hold the title of CEO, but an invisible hierarchy has been established. You're just no longer the true leader of your own domain.
Section 3. The sovereignty transfer loop. This brings us to the system dynamics of the whole process. I want to show you exactly how this plays out over time. Because auxiliary forces don't just take over overnight. They act like a parasitically coupled system that slowly drains the host through what we call the sovereignty transfer loop.
Let's walk through this dangerous feedback loop. Step 1. You rely on external help to survive a crisis. Step 2. And this is where the poison really sets in. Because you were saved, you now have a dramatically reduced incentive to build your own native capabilities. Why spend the time and money if someone else is going to do it for you, right? This leads directly to Step 3, deeper dependence on that ally, which ultimately ends at Step 4, the total erosion of your sovereignty. Relying on outside help literally destroys your internal immune system.
Let's move to how this builds, because it quickly evolves into the control transfer loop. As the auxiliary force operates within your domain, Step 1 happens. The auxiliary achieves success. They fix the problem. But look closely at Steps 2 and 3. As they succeed, the legitimacy of the foreign force skyrockets in the eyes of your own population or organization, while your legitimacy as the ruler is simultaneously tanked. Your authority just becomes performative. You're basically a figurehead now.
And that leads us to the intellectual climax of Machiavelli's theory. Sovereignty is not legal, it is coercive. Take a second to really digest that. Sovereignty isn't just some piece of paper. It's not a formal title or a nicely worded legal contract. Whoever actually controls the decisive operational capability, whoever can physically impose outcomes, that is the real sovereign.
Section 4. Modern-day auxiliary forces. Now you might be sitting there thinking, okay, this is great for 16th century Italian princes, but what about today? Well, let's rapidly bridge the Renaissance to the 21st century, because this exact sovereignty transfer model, it's playing out right now across all our modern systems.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how universal this law is. Think about trading systems. Your auxiliary force might be external liquidity providers. It works totally fine during calm markets, but during a panic, control completely transfers to the liquidity source. Or in cybersecurity, if you outsource your incident response instead of building internal capability, that external vendor becomes the actual controller of your company during a massive data breach. And for tech startups heavily dependent on centralized cloud or AI platforms, well, your autonomy becomes entirely conditional on the rules of that platform. Outsourcing your core survival capabilities creates the exact same sovereignty traps today as it did 500 years ago.
Listen, if you take away just one pattern from this entire explainer, let it be this. The actor that guarantees your survival eventually dictates the terms of your existence. Period. If another actor becomes totally necessary for your survival, whether that's a military ally, a massive tech vendor, or even a key employee, your autonomy instantly becomes conditional.
Section 5. Critiques and counter strategies. Of course, no mental model is absolutely perfect. Let's look at an objective critique of Machiavelli's framework. While his structural analysis is honestly brilliant, it does contain a few historical blind spots that we really need to acknowledge before we talk about how to defend against all this.
So Machiavelli suffered a bit from survivorship bias. He focused almost exclusively on states that were entirely consumed by their stronger protectors. He kind of largely ignored the concept of symmetrical interdependence. Modern systems show us that interdependence can actually increase your resilience, but only when the dependency is mutually balanced. If you both need each other equally, the alliance works. But Machiavelli's deeper truth absolutely survives. Asymmetrical dependency, where one side can survive without the other, always destroys autonomy.
So how do we avoid this collapse condition? Here are the highly actionable Machiavellian takeaways. First, maintain your independent native force, your core internal capabilities at all costs. Second, use alliances temporarily for specific goals, but never, ever rely on them structurally for your day-to-day survival. Third, preserve your monopoly over your coercive infrastructure. Basically, keep the keys to the engine in your own pocket. And finally, diversify your alliances to prevent single-node dependency. Never let just one external force become absolutely indispensable to your survival.
I want to end the explainer by leaving you with this really provocative question to chew on. If your strongest auxiliary, your biggest vendor, your strongest ally, your absolute most vital outsourced platform vanished tomorrow, do you still hold the internal capability to survive? It's a tough question for sure, but answering it honestly is the only way to ensure your true long-term sovereignty. Thank you for joining me, and I highly encourage you to rethink your own structural alliances, both in your professional systems and your personal life.